Welcome, you're listening to the Simply Talking podcast, your go-to audio experience that serves up hot topics, breaking news, and live interviews every Thursday at 8 p.m. With your host Simply Talking, always ready to dive deep into the world of talks, joined by his co-host, the ever-inspiring Miss Confidence. Together they're on a mission to make your Thursdays brighter and smarter. Before we dive in, we've got a quick favor to ask. If you love tuning in with us, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It's you who keeps this show going, and we appreciate every single like, share, and subscription. Alright, let's get the show on the road. Welcome to the Simply Talking podcast. Simply Talking and Miss Confidence, let's start the show.
And we are back. Welcome to Simply Talking podcast. I'm your host, Simply Talking, with my co-host, Miss Confidence, in the building. And tonight, we're doing the unveiling the hidden impact of birth trauma, maternal suicide, and its generational consequences. We have Miss Philippa Scott here tonight, and we're going to be interviewing her and asking her some questions in regards to the topic. And how you doing, Miss Philippa?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, not a problem. You want to tell the people a little bit about yourself before we ask the questions?
Certainly. So I live in the beautiful Queensland, Australia, and I work with women all over the world. I work with men also. So I specialize as a working with families who experience birth trauma or generational trauma and that impact on their parenting as well as on their birthing experiences. I'm the mother of 4 beautiful daughters, and I have a grandbaby who is almost 8 months old. So I have a reasonable amount of personal experience, and it was my own journey of birth trauma that led me to this space of working with women and families. And I say predominantly women, but men are very recognized in this space as well. So
I would agree. How do that affect men?
So for men, birth trauma is it occurs in roughly 1 in 10 men, and that's what we know about. We're not actually asking men, and we're not actually educating them on what birth trauma really looks like. So I believe that number is underrepresented. But for men, when they have children, typically men are at a stage in their life where they are at least consciously competent in their job and so on. They go into a birthing environment with the person that they love most in the world, and they don't know what's going on. They've not been at a birth before. They've not necessarily had enough information and preparation as to their role and what birth really looks like, when to do nothing, when to do something. And so they walk away often having felt completely consciously incompetent, all whilst having an experience where their partner and potentially their baby is going through something really major. And what can happen is that for men, because of that experience, and then the fact that nobody even says to them afterwards, "Hey mate, are you okay? How did stuff come up for you there? What was that like for you?" We're not even asking them, so they just have to push it down, and it festers. And a lot of men then resort to workaholism. They just throw themselves into something they do know because they feel more in control in that space. So and that might be at the gym, it might be with their mates at the pub, it might be at work. There's all sorts of ways that plays out, but they often just run away because it's too hard.
Got you.
I would agree.
Mm-hmm. And we know that marriages break down usually within 18 months of the birth of a child. So something's going on there, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, Miss Confidence.
Okay, I'm going to kick it off. What are some common misconceptions about birth trauma, and how do you think that impacts on families?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that a woman or a family who's experienced birth trauma should uh, focus on the fact that they have a healthy baby and should just get on with it. So we see birth trauma, or our culture sees birth trauma in two ways. Firstly, that it's something that isn't as relevant as the health of the baby. And we also see it as something that makes you a bit precious. If your experience didn't happen the way you wanted it to, then maybe you were thinking more about the candles and the flowers, or the aesthetics of it, as opposed to, the fact that you were supposed to be just having a child, and that just makes you precious. What people don't realize is that the process of having a baby, the process of giving birth, is so physiologically and psychologically impactful in a family's journey that it can impact the way that they parent. It can impact the way that they show up for themselves and in their relationships. And because a lot of that journey is hormonal, a lot of that journey is primal, and it brings up lots of other things in their pre-baby life and potentially their own childhood. So the most women will hear at some point after having had birth trauma, uh, at least you have a healthy baby. You should just be grateful. And what that does is it says, oh, well, I'm being selfish. I'm not actually, I felt like I was grateful for my baby, but maybe I'm focusing more on me than on the baby. I don't matter. My feelings don't matter. And all I should be thinking about is this baby and being grateful for it and launching myself into that experience, which just further reduces that person's sense of self and their confidence and their ability to move forward in life, let alone parenting.
Hmm. So, how does birth trauma affect the mental health of a new mother?
In lots of countries around the world, and America is really really big with this. Australia is really bad at this. Right from the very beginning of a woman's pregnancy, the medical system is designed to um, demoralize women or make them feel like they're not the expert in the process. They go into the doctor's office to confirm their pregnancy. They've already peed on a stick, but the doctor wants them to pee on their stick to confirm it in their office, like they need to tell the woman they're pregnant. There's all sorts of tests, all sorts of assumptions that women can't do this thing. We talk to them about, the options for drugs, the options for induction, the options for all of these things, assuming that their body doesn't do what it's meant to do, that they can grow a baby, but they can't possibly give birth to it without intervention. And when we continue to eat away slowly at a woman's confidence, at a woman's ability to follow her intuition, and then through the process of birth trauma, we often completely eradicate her confidence in herself and her own ability to parent and birth and know what's going on and know how to feel into her intuition. And then we send her home with a newborn baby with zero support, no information except what she can find for herself, no physical support. We're not going in there and feeding her and cleaning her house for her and making sure that she's got someone to hold the baby so she can pee. And there's no village. And so she's stuck in this isolation. And then on top of that, when she does share that she has these feelings about her birth, we tell her she should just be grateful because she has a healthy baby. And we think we're doing the right thing when we say that. Mental health just continues to decline. And often that stuff starts in our childhood. but this experience exacerbates it so much because it's such a big experience, and parenting is such a big experience and is often really isolating. One of the biggest causes of death in the first year after having a baby, so in that first postpartum year, is actually maternal suicide. And in America, the number is higher than anywhere else in the world. I think it's the second killer of women afterwards. So we're not talking about postpartum bleeding. We're not talking about postpartum infection. They're not the biggest killers of women postpartum. It's not medical. It's psychological. And in Australia, it's the third top, and it's the same in a number of other Western countries. And we're not even talking about that. We're not talking about the fact that women are taking their lives because they feel so disconnected from who they were before. They feel so unsupported. They feel like they have no idea what they're doing enough that they actually are willing to, and they feel like their children, their partners, and everyone else in their life are just better off without them, and the pain is too great, and they can't continue to do it. And then obviously that's the worst case scenario, but there are obviously other smaller case scenarios as well.
I was going to say, should I go to the next question? Because she just answered the one I was going to ask. You did. You hit it on the nose.
I ask my question, then you can come back.
Okay.
What are some signs or symptoms that indicate a mother may be experiencing birth trauma?
So I have a full list on my website in a downloadable resource for people to look at so that they can understand the difference between whether they're experiencing postnatal depression or birth trauma. But one of the biggest ones with birth trauma will be flashbacks. So they'll often experience flashbacks in their sleep or in their wake time. So similar to PTSD, and in fact, 16% of women will experience PTSD from birth. So that's a big thing. All of those normal PTSD symptoms a woman might experience. Hypervigilance is a really big sign. So when you are hypervigilant of your children, you're always worried about something going wrong. You become quite controlling and needing to micromanage everything. It's a really big sign of birth trauma. Lack of the ability to sleep even when the baby is sleeping, and it can play out in anxiety, depression, OCD, perfectionism, hypervigilance, or normal sort of trauma responses, but it can be very specific to the baby and her home and so on.
Gotcha.
I can't hear you, Miss Confidence.
We can't hear you on mute.
Oh, look, I put the phone on. I put the speaker on me. I apologize. How can health care providers help support mothers to have better experience dealing with the traumas?
It's a really, really good question. So first of all, healthcare providers can help help in preventing birth trauma. And one of the biggest ways they can help prevent birth trauma is to actually respect women and their autonomy and their place in birth. We know that some 76% of birth trauma is caused by care providers and how they chose to treat a woman during the birthing or pregnancy or postnatal experience. So most birth trauma is actually caused by care providers, which is horrendous in and of itself. But if we then want to help these women and men recover, we need to go back to respect. We need to go back to autonomy. We need to go back to listening and acknowledging, and where necessary, apologizing and say, yeah, I hear you. I see you. That was really shit. That must have been really hard for you. And here are some resources to help. But the very fact that care providers are causing the problem means that often just the very act of them apologizing and taking responsibility, and I know that's not good for insurance purposes, but them actually taking responsibility can help to take the onus off the woman and her, because she often will take on the guilt. She'll take on the responsibility of that birth trauma and assume that she messed up, that it was her body that is broken. But it's not her body that's broken. The system is broken and it doesn't support families. And it's particularly broken for minority groups, hugely broken in that space. Whether that be for same-sex couples, people of color, or, and I can't speak to either of those as in my own journey, but the birth trauma that I deal with from those minority groups is out of this world.
Wow. Are there any preventive measures or interventions in place to address maternal suicide?
I don't think we're even talking about it. There are organisations around the world though who do who are at least talking about birth trauma. If you jump online and pop in birth trauma, there are free services around, or free spaces where you can look into birth trauma, what it means, how it might affect you, and so on. Talk therapy, in my opinion, isn't necessarily useful. We do need to be able to tell our story at least once to somebody who understands and who gets it and validates our experience. But over and above that, outside of that, seeking therapy that actually works to close down that experience, and the ones that go before to reset the nervous system, that's in my opinion the most effective way to deal with it. But that we're just not even talking about it as a whole. We need to be talking about this so that we can prevent the further cultural dilemma that we have of not acknowledging it, of just assuming that birth is shit. Sorry, I swear a lot because I'm an Aussie, but we say, oh well, that's just giving birth is a traumatic experience. Giving birth is a crappy experience. You just have to get through it in order to have a child. And so every woman who's been through birth trauma perpetuates that. Well, yeah, it is crap and you just need to deal with it and move on. Whereas that actually isn't helping. We need to actually reframe what birth looks like. So that women can understand that it can be an empowering experience. It can actually be an experience that allows you to sit in your confidence, to tap into your intuition and know who you are as a woman and as a mother and as a father, to be able to parent with joy and not trauma.
I agree. What role does societal stigma play in preventing open discussions about birth trauma and maternal suicide?
Well, that's a really good question. So there's this underlying cultural dichotomy. We've got this people who won't share their birth trauma story with pregnant women because they don't want to scare them. So they don't share their bad story. And then you have women who have incredible, empowering, amazing births, and they don't share their birth story either because they don't want people who didn't have that experience to feel bad. So we have this real, we hear the bad stories, or we hear the dramatic stories often, but we're not hearing the other side of that. So we're not actually hearing the real truth about what's going on in birth because people are afraid of making other people feel bad or of scaring them. And that can be that's not helpful. We need to actually tell the good stories. We need to tell the bad stories. We need to tell all the stories, and then we need to talk about, well, how do we shift from that? How do we move out of the space where it's hugely traumatic, and move towards a space where it's more normal to have this empowering normal birth. I was talking to a midwife yesterday about the fact that over the 20 years I've been doing this, I've done a lot of work, and I've spent a lot of time in this space. And when my daughter gave birth to her daughter, as a 20-year-old woman at home with the support of 2 midwives and myself as a single young woman on the spectrum, with everything against her, from a psychological perspective in terms of, where she was at in her relationships and so on, she gave birth to that baby, who was 9 pound 3, so not little, at home in the birth pool on her own steam. She caught her own baby and she picked that baby up. And, she doesn't talk about that as being this amazing, incredible, fairy light story. We were in the shed and we didn't even have running water, right? Like it wasn't pretty, but it was totally raw and real, and it set her up for her mothering. And she doesn't have, I said to this midwife, I'm so grateful that the work that I've done set her up to believe in her ability to give birth to the point where she didn't hold fear. She didn't ever say, I can't do this. She just did it. And she doesn't go out there talking about, wow, I did it. She just goes, yeah, that's the thing I did, because that's what she expected to be able to do, because that's what she was brought up to believe was normal and natural for her body. But when we have to fight the system to do that, when we have to, and a lot of women who've had cesarean sections who go on to have vaginal births, they have this, I did it. And that's awesome because they did have to fight to do that. But what we want to do ultimately is eliminate this, I did it. We want to get to a point where we go, yeah, I did it. And it's what we all do. Whereas right now we have to fight to get that in the system. And so it is a big deal when we get to do that, whereas it shouldn't have to be. It should just be what we do, and that's normal. And then we can all feel good about that.
Definitely. How can a family member and loved one provide support to mothers who have experienced birth trauma?
Be there. Be there in really practical ways, as well as just listen. You don't have to fix it. You're not going to fix it for her, and you don't need to take it away. Don't tell her she should be grateful. Just tell her you love her and that she's amazing, and that what she is going through is really hard. Validate her experience. And then put the dishwasher on, make her some food, hold her baby so she can shower and clean her floors, and be her community. Show up and show her that she matters, and that what she's doing matters, and that she is valued in society for the role that she has as a carer. We need to value these women more, and these young families, and honor the fact that they need to have time to bond. They need to have time together to learn to feed, to learn to adapt to this new world, and that it is big. So be there, show up, do the washing for her, make sure that she's got food in her belly and for her family. Do the practical things that 300 years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because it's what we did. We just turned up and we supported. And, we just don't do that for each other anymore. And it's so sad. And it is exacerbating the trauma. And COVID, women who had their babies through COVID experienced this even more with that social isolation.
Oh, yeah.
And they're still suffering. They are still suffering.
Wow.
Agree. Yeah. Are there any long-term effects of birth trauma on future generations?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that happens when we experience birth trauma is we often experience guilt. And when we parent from guilt, when we parent from hypervigilance and fear and worry and a lack of confidence, that's what that's the underlying message that we pass to our children is fear, trauma, and a lack of confidence. And so those children experience their parenting journey in a different way. They pick up core beliefs about themselves that come from these experiences and the way that they were parented. And when you have a generation of children that um, that have experienced trauma in their birth, and then the impact of not having parents who can be present, not having parents who can, or having parents who are triggered every time the child does something, they can't be themselves authentically, they don't know who they truly are, their own confidence is undermined, and they go into their adulthood and their own parenting journey with those same underlying core beliefs of I'm not enough, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't back myself, and that then impacts the next generation again. And when you have women whose parents, whose mother had birth trauma, and her mother had birth trauma, she's going to assume that birth trauma is her story, and that is probably the thing that I'm most proud of, is that my daughter doesn't have, we've broken the cycle. She doesn't have a birth trauma story to tell. She just has an incredible birth story to tell. And that's the idea of the work that I do, is to change the story for the generation. And I'm not alone in creating that for her. My sister I had a cesarean for my first baby. My sister had a cesarean for her second baby, and we both went on to have, home births and natural births afterwards. And so when my daughter was asked, where are you going to birth your baby? Do we want to do this at home, or do you want to do this in hospital? She said, is that even a question? We home birth. That's what we do. And so her story was changed because of the decisions we made. And that means her daughter has a new story.
So you say home birth.
Mm.
So how is that? How do y'all do that?
So that's an interesting question, particularly because in the States, there are so many states where having your own midwife and birthing at home can be illegal, which you have to change that. That takes away a woman's autonomy. What should be happening in our world, because home birth is actually proven to be as safe, if not safer, than birthing in a hospital, particularly for a first-time mother. So we have all of these studies that show that it's safe, if not safer. The World Health Organization talks about the fact that having a known midwife is the gold standard of care for every pregnant woman, regardless of her risk factors, because you can add a doctor on top of that, but she should still have a known midwife. So we need to shift the way we see birth and we see pregnancy. We need to give women back their autonomy and say, this is your jam. You guys do this. We're here if you need us. We're here to support you in whatever medical way that we need to do that. But assume, because the World Health Organization says that only 5 to 15% of all births are medically, or all births that are cesareans will improve outcomes for mothers and babies. So we're having a lot of surgery. In Australia, we have a 48% induction rate. That's not medically necessary. So we're doing lots of things to women and taking away their autonomy. So, home birth is it's a very popular way to give birth. And in some countries, it's normal. You go to the United Kingdom and in Great Britain, you can have a home birth. It's just one of your options. In New Zealand, it's the same thing.
So the natural home birth, now I've seen that before on some videos, and they say the natural way to do it is the woman should be standing up. Is that correct?
It can be, if that's what feels good. Both of mine, my home births were in water, so I was actually squatting or kneeling in the water. A lot of women choose to do it that way. It's quite supportive in water. Water is a really great support and pain relief method. So a lot of women will give birth in water when they birth at home.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, but it's actually about just following whatever way the woman wants to. But lying on your back on a bed with your feet up in stirrups, that's you know
That's not the right way, right?
no,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's easy.
that's
It's
the
easier for the
that's
doctor
the
to see, but
government way.
it's not easier.
yeah. My
Yeah,
cousin, all three of her kids were home birth. She did the water, everything natural. I have a question though.
Yeah.
What if you have what if you're you're doing home birth and you have complications, as you
Yes.
made some women need C-sections? What risks would the woman be put in?
Yeah, so that's a really good question for them to discuss with their care provider, their midwife. So, midwives are equipped to know that their job is to determine if something is not normal. And so there's education that can be provided during the pregnancy. There are risk factors during pregnancy that might indicate the need for something later on. But if we look at the figures for America per se, your maternal outcomes, despite all of the interventions that you have, your fetal maternal outcomes are worse than any other country, any other Western country in the world. So you have all of these interventions, you have all of these systems, but your outcomes are poor. And your country doesn't support home birth as being a normal, and so, as I said, some states have it outlawed. You can't have a home birth with a midwife; it's illegal. So you're in that instance, you've removed one of the safest options. So midwives are trained to understand when things are going outside of normal, and then they transfer to the hospital. And generally speaking, women will have enough time to do that. They're also equipped to deal with a lot of emergencies, a lot of things they have skills. That's why they go to university to do those things. Um, so a lot of things they can work out. And then there are some things where you do need an obstetrician. And generally speaking, midwives will know when to transfer in for those sorts of things.
and I definitely agree with that because if you think about it, um, how was they birthing the kids back in those late days? They had a midwife.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think, like I said, when I seen the videos or whatever, and I said the people were standing up, like you said, in the water and stuff like that. The Yeah, they're laying on your back and getting out here. They putting epidural needles in the lady's back and all these different
Yeah.
things, and I think that's worse.
And I
Look,
had
I've
three
had
epidurals, so
there you go. So, and here's the thing, right? It's actually about listening to what women want. If the woman chooses to have an elective cesarean on a particular day, that's what she wants, that's most safe, that's where she feels safest, and she's made an educated choice about that, then that's her choice, that's her right. If a woman wants to give birth at home with no one present, that's her right, that's her choice. And anything in between is her right and her choice. But what we're doing is we're taking away those choices and we're saying you have to do it this way because this is what works for our insurance, or this is what works for our fear of litigation, or this is what works for our patriarchy, or whatever it might be. When we take away that choice, that's part of the way that we're causing trauma and that we are causing dysfunction for families. And so I fully support families to make a choice that is right for them. I'm just developing a course at the moment which is around birth after cesarean for partners, because partners can really, if they're not on the same page as the birthing woman, they can really derail a birth very quickly. A lot of the birth trauma work that I do There's a lot of resentment towards partners for not doing what the woman thought that they would do. And so we have to work through that afterwards. So this course that I'm putting together is an easy to digest system for dads to get on the same page and to understand the decisions that are being made and the information behind them. And we talk about repeat cesarean section, and we talk about, having a natural birth and the options around that for support and so on. Not because it's my job to make a judgment call or a value call for them, but because it's my job to provide them with information so that they can choose what they want to do and then have the freedom to be supported in that choice. That's when we remove. So what should, in my opinion, what should happen is a woman she announces she's pregnant. Great. Here's however much money it costs in your country. And let's say it's, I don't know, $8,000, in Australia. Here's your $8,000. You go choose. Do you want to give birth at home? Do you want to give birth in a birth center? Do you want to give birth with an obstetrician? There's your money. Go spend it with, how you want. We'll pay. You choose what you want as your model of care. That gives true autonomy for women because it is their bodies. And it is a process that they are going through, and they need to do whatever feels right and comfortable for them. And then we need to support them wholeheartedly in that. And then we can start preventing birth trauma.
Gotcha. Go ahead, Miss Confidence.
Oh, it's on me? I thought it's on you. You next.
No, go ahead. Number 11.
Okay. How can we raise awareness about the issue of maternal suicide, encourage even more open conversations around it?
Start talking about it in your groups. Start acknowledging it with the people that you are associated with. Start saying to new mums, I'm here to help. Give me a job. Or just start doing stuff. We need to be pulling people up as well. When you hear someone say, at least you have a healthy baby, stop. Stop. That's not how we support a new mum. We don't tell her to be grateful. We tell her, I hear you, I see you, and I'm here for you. And when we individually choose to change the narrative that we'll accept, then we can start to do it and say to people, I just did a reel this morning. I'm like, well, sometimes you're going to hear the hard things from me. I'm going to say hard things to you so that you can be a better person. So say the hard things. Say, no, we don't talk to new mums that way. Did you know that maternal suicide is one of the biggest causes of death in this country for mums in the first year? So we don't talk to them like that, because that can be, you're part of the problem, not the solution. Just say it.
Is that number in Australia or is that a global number?
Well, your number is higher than ours. So yours is the top 2 and ours is the top 3.
So who's the top? Who's number 1?
No, I mean it's the second greatest killer of women in their first year. So maternal suicide is the second cause of death, the second highest cause of death in America for the first postpartum year, and in Australia it's the third most common cause of death. So there's no country that exceeds yours in terms of the Western world. You do have countries where their sanitation and all of those other things are a massive issue, and their lack of access to any healthcare can cause problems. But in the Western world, where we have those systems set up, that maternal suicide is among the largest causes of death.
So is healthcare free over there?
It is, yeah. So, but not all types of healthcare. So in Australia, you can access. We have a Medicare system, so we pay a lot more tax than you guys do. But then that healthcare is free. Having said that, I had to pay cash out of my pocket to have midwives for my daughter, because that's not covered. and they just announced a publicly funded home birth for Queensland, but it'll be very, very select and like it's a 30k radius from the hospital. It's very a lot of women will miss out on that. So then you still have to pay out of your own pocket for different healthcare. And most Commonwealth countries have the same sort of system where the healthcare is free. So Australia and New Zealand and so on, the UK, all of those are set up with free healthcare.
So we just being abused over here in America, huh?
Absolutely. Do some of the countries have an option?
Yeah, definitely. So
some of the countries have an option for health care for midwives, or no insurance company covers that?
Yeah, so no insurance companies here cover midwives. So if you have private health insurance, which a lot of people do, like I use it for chiropractic, and if I want a private surgery to get through quicker than going through the public system, then my private health will cover that. But none of them cover a midwife. They'll only cover an obstetrician. So that's really crap. But some countries do cover. So you go to New Zealand, and over there they'll cover whatever option you want. It's just that you pick, which is the ultimate goal. And same in the UK, you can pick.
Gotcha. So what steps can be taken to improve the postpartum care system and ensure early identification of birth trauma cases?
Oh, that's a great question. So we need to be providing ongoing known carers for people so that we have early intervention. When I was campaigning for the birth centre in Townsville, one of the things we understood was that known carer, having a known midwife throughout your pregnancy, birth, and then into the early postpartum period is a great way to find your early indicators, to be able to have early intervention in that woman's experience or in that family's experience, to know whether or not more intervention or more services are required in order to support that woman's experience or that family's experience. And so the first thing we can do is provide that continuity of care in a really real way. I'm not talking about having an obstetrician you see once a month for 5 minutes a pop, or for 10 minutes with a scan and so on. I'm talking about somebody who knows you, somebody who you trust, and somebody who you can actually have that conversation with. Look, sometimes that can even be having a doula. Somebody who knows you through your pregnancy, who has those conversations with you about your values and what's important to you, and who then supports you in the early weeks afterwards, so that she can help you debrief that birth and help you understand and have the support in-house. Now, again, that's not something everybody can afford to do. So if we can't provide that through the healthcare system, then we as family members and as friends and communities need to think about the culture with which we support new families. My daughter, for the first 3 days, I said, your job's to learn how to feed this baby. Just do that. You just do that, and I'll deal with everything else. And then on day 4 or 3 or 4, I taught her how to change a nappy. And then on the next day, I taught her how to dress her baby. And we gradually have added new things in. Now, I still do all her washing because she lives on the property with us. We're very blessed to have 7 acres, and she's here with us. So I get to be a very hands-on grandma, but that means that I get to support her. And when she's not okay, I know she's not okay. And I can step in and I can go, here, let me help you. Let me support you in a real way. And so as mothers, as mother-in-laws, as sister-in-laws, we need to stop saying, you've got to just step up and do it. We've got to start saying, let me hold your hand. There's a wonderful, and I didn't create it, but it's something that really resonates with me. It's the idea of the 7 sisters. And every woman deserves 7 sisters. So it's 7 women in your life who can step up once a week to bring you a meal and to spend an hour or 2 in your home doing washing or stacking the dishwasher or something. So just showing up once a week for a couple of hours every week for a few weeks, and that can also be helpful in in early intervention and preventative, because she doesn't feel alone and unvalued.
Yeah. We can't hear you. You're on mute again. And check your
Oops, I'm sorry.
And check the messages. I sent you a message too.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Yes. So, are there any cultural or society factors that contribute to the prevalence of maternal suicide in certain regions or communities?
Yeah, I think it's particularly prevalent where there is more social isolation and more cultural expectation that independence is valued as opposed to community, and where there is where the focus is on what everything looks like as opposed to real relationships and things being supported. So if you go to some cultures, they have, you go to India, mums have 40 days where people just come in and do everything. She doesn't have to do anything. In America, you guys are back at work within 2 weeks. Like, you have a 2-week maternal. Like,
It's 6. It's 6 weeks.
6 now, right? Like
It's
that.
6 weeks and 8 weeks if you get a C-section.
Okay, so what do dads have? What do dads get?
All my kids, I had 6 weeks.
Okay, so but what do dads get? What do dads have 6 weeks where they can have off too?
Yeah,
Nope.
now they just started maternal leave. Yeah, maternity leave.
Oh,
Great.
okay.
That's awesome.
It took
So
a
that's
long
a great
time.
start. Yeah. But that should be normal, right? But how many women, and I can say this because my mother said it to me, right? So my mother had her first child before she was married, and so in country South Australia at that time, it was, the decision was made to put him up for adoption, and then when she had the next 3, she didn't live near her mum, and she just had to do it all. Her mum came for a week after she had each baby to help out, and then that was it. And so that was the experience that she passed on to me. And that's a really hard experience to have. And so then when we, when my daughter fell pregnant, she said to me, well, you should just, she's just got to do it on her own. You should just kick her out and let her do it on her own. And I just went, no. That is not congruent with my value system and how I want to do life. But we have to change that culture and pass down a different experience. We have to teach women how to create community. It's my next book. It will be around how to create community for women and mothers. And it's super important that we start shifting what we even say to women. Yeah. Oh, you're on mute now.
She got me muting my mouth. How does the healthcare system handle cases of birth trauma, both from a medical and psychological perspective?
Every system's a bit different, but generally speaking, they don't handle it very well. Then women are they're sent home so quickly. They don't have services afterwards. They're not, when you give birth with a known midwife, you have that midwife with you then for 6 weeks after the baby's born, doing regular visits and check-ins. Women in the system don't tend to have that, so they're not seeing the same person who can see the shift. So they're just not dealing with it, generally speaking, and because of litigation fears, that they won't take responsibility, which means that they're not they're not actually hearing women, which means they're just making it worse. So some places will offer the opportunity to do a birth debrief afterwards, but you can't properly debrief with the people who were there who caused the problem, right? You're not going to get satisfaction necessarily. You might get their answer to your question, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the truth. So it can be a real land mine. Or a minefield, sorry, to navigate that. And they'll often just refer you on to an outside source to have talk therapy or find a support group or something like that.
Are there any ongoing researches or studies or even incentives focused on understanding and addressing birth traumas?
New South Wales has recently done, so New South Wales is a state in Australia. They've just done a big birth trauma inquiry, and we're hoping to have that pushed out through the rest of the country. And they had, in Australia when we have, we're a bit chill over here in some respects. So normally when there's a big inquiry, you might get a couple of hundred responses. There was over 4,000 responses and submissions for this inquiry, and it was a massive response, and overwhelmingly the outcome said that women's experiences of birth in the system was unsupported, disrespectful, and often they were the recipients of obstetric violence. So they experienced obstetric violence in the system. And we've just had, we've also just had a big study done by some researchers here in Australia about how women felt in their birth experience, which helped to articulate the kind of numbers and what women would want and what women would do differently. Would they make the same decisions? And overwhelmingly, they said no. They would make different choices about how their birth happened and where they chose to birth and so on. So, yeah.
So how can we involve fathers and partners in a discussion and support process surrounding birth trauma?
Great question. First of all, acknowledge that they might have birth trauma themselves. They actually may be going through, and sometimes it's actually scarier for dads than for women, partly because women often have done the research and they know what they're, they know that sometimes in birth nothing needs to happen. So I remember one gentleman saying to me, it was so traumatic for me because she was just in all of this pain and nobody did anything. And he didn't have any support, and nobody said to him, nothing is what needs to be done right now. That actually this isn't something to fix. You can't fix this. There's nothing wrong. It's just a process that has to be worked through. It has to be gone through. And yep, sometimes that's painful, but it's not outside of her capacity, and we don't have to do anything. There's nothing to fix. And so we need to be involving partners in the fact that this is a big thing for both of them. They both may experience trauma. And then we need to be supporting the two of them, having paternal leave so that dads can spend time connecting and bonding, and because men have a chemical change as well in the time, so their hormones change in the first 3 months after having a baby. Their testosterone levels drop and their estrogen levels rise, and that it helps with the bonding and creates a lower sex drive, which is can be handy in those first few weeks afterwards. But it helps with bonding and things like that as well. They become a bit more maternal. They want to stay, and they're not so adventure seeking in that first little while. It only lasts for about 3 months, but then but that's time enough. So we need to be honoring that and asking men or women that the partners, how was your experience? Is she okay? Does she need support? And then showing up and providing that.
Wow. It's my turn or your turn?
It's your turn.
All right. Are there any? I think you just asked that question. Yes, you did. What role does access to mental health services play in preventing maternal suicide?
When we have access to support, when we're allowed to, or we have the opportunity to debrief, when we have the opportunity to work through the trauma, it doesn't sit in our subconscious. So very quick physiology lesson. When we have a fight, flight, freeze event, we release all these stress hormones, and we shut down different parts of our body. So if you're running from a tiger, you don't need to digest your Wheaties, right? So your gut shuts down. You don't need to be doing higher maths, so your frontal lobe shuts down. And there are parts of your brain that shut down, including the hippocampus, the part responsible for long-term memory. And when a system's not in balance, the memory part can stay in shutdown mode. And so that event is sitting in the unconscious. It's happening now, it's happening now, it's happening now. And your unconscious is running your body, right? Your breathing, all your hormones, all of those things are run by your unconscious. So if your unconscious is thinking that this trauma is still happening, then your body is responding in that way. And it's why things like PTSD and anxiety and hypervigilance and all that occurs, because you're on fight, flight, freeze continuously. So when we have a therapy that can turn that videotape loop that it's happening now off, and go from a place of I'm not safe to it's over and I'm safe now, and the body and the unconscious know that, then we're not triggered all the time. We're not out of balance. We can actually then operate from a calm nervous system, and things don't send us over the edge. Things don't trigger us in, and because when you do that, when you actually can turn off that videotape loop and go from a place of remembering. So what we want to do is remember the event was painful, but we don't want to experience pain at the remembering, right? So if we can heal to a place where we can remember it was a crap experience, but not experience pain at the time of remembering, then everything in our life is improved, and suicide rates are reduced, eliminated even when we don't have that.
Interesting. Simply, you want to close out and ask your questions? Because I know we almost at time. Or do you want me to go ahead and ask the last one?
Yeah, you had the last question.
Okay. You know I like to ask questions. How can we educate healthcare providers about signs and symptoms of birth trauma and ensure early intervention and support?
Yeah, I think the key there is in treating birth trauma as just as real as war trauma or natural traumas. So, we know that somebody who's been through an earthquake or been through a tornado or any of those things can have trauma. And birth in the system that we're in, with the kind of support that is there, it is just as likely to cause trauma as any of those other events are. So we need to be, healthcare providers need to take it seriously. They need to understand that this isn't something that just goes away. I recently worked with a woman whose birth trauma is 32 years old, and she'd been living with PTSD for that entire time. And when she became free of that, her whole life changed. But Nobody, and she worked in the system. She was a midwife. Nobody acknowledged her trauma. Nobody. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to talk about it.
All right. Well, we rounded down to the end of the show, and I got these special 10 questions I like to ask everybody at the end, and answer them to the best of your ability.
Okay.
All right. Childhood celebrity crush.
Oh, it's a good question. Maybe the Fresh Prince.
Oh, okay. Who would you trade places with for a day?
Who would I trade places with? I'd love to get inside of Ina May Gaskin's mind and be in her world. She's a midwife over in the States.
Got you. Love versus respect.
I think respect is an outcome of love. So I guess love.
Okay. Biggest risk you ever took?
I don't know. Maybe going into business for myself.
Okay. Best compliment you ever got?
Actually, recently, I was working with a woman who had some mother stuff. She's late in her pregnancy, and she was having some stuff around her mum issues. And we were talking on the phone late one night, and she said to me, "You're like the fairy godmother that every woman needs." And I thought that was lovely.
Okay. What never fails to make you laugh?
A baby's laugh. If you don't laugh when a baby laughs, you've just got a heart of stone.
Worst piece of advice you ever got?
I don't know. I really don't know. I probably didn't take it on. I don't know. I think after I had my first baby, and I had birth trauma, the advice that I received from a lot of people was to just get on with it. Just push it down and don't deal with it. And I did that for a while.
Okay. Something you wish you was better at?
I wish I was better at getting my message into written word. I do it well in verbally, but finding tone in the written word, there's something I'm still learning to do to translate that.
Well, I'm gonna give you some advice on that.
Yeah.
You start using Chat GPT. That'll help you out a lot.
Yeah, I like Bard, or it's now Gemini too. It's very helpful.
Who would you like to be stranded on a desert island with?
My husband.
All right. Tell us something we don't know about you.
I have about 50 chickens and 4 cows.
Wow.
And I love them. Chickens are like fluffy dinosaurs.
I was going to say fresh eggs every day.
Yeah.
Ain't that where they come from, though? That's where the chickens come from, right? The dinosaur family or something like that?
Is it? I don't know. They're so funny.
Definitely. Well, you want to give a shout out to your social media platforms and your website and stuff? So before we get out of here,
I'd love to. So my business is called Fantastic Futures, but I couldn't get my website with the S on the end, so it's fantasticfuture.com.au. You can find all my socials there. On Facebook, it's Healing Birth and Rewriting Unconscious Parenting Scripts. On Instagram, I'm in there as Fantastic Future Birth_Beyond. I'm on TikTok and YouTube as Birth Trauma Buster. So yeah, but you'll find all of those things on my website. So if you only remember one, that's where to go.
Got you. All right. Well, we want to thank you for giving us this interview tonight, and we definitely appreciate it. And like I said, I love that accent, that Australian accent. That is cool. Think about
It is.
what was that guy name? Is he still alive? What's that guy name?
Oh.
I think he was from Australia. Crocodile Dundee.
Oh, yes, I believe he is. I believe he is. We were traveling the States when that movie came out. It was very interesting to see the response in America for that video. As an Australian, that's good.
He made a lot of money. He got rich then.
I just want to know, before you go, do the kangaroos really be fighting people? Because I see a lot of kangaroos from Australia fighting people all the time, and then they're like,
are they that muscular too? Are they
run
really that big?
they run up on dogs.
Yeah, there are small ones though. So around here we get them, and they're not your big reds. You find the big reds out in Central Australia, in sort of more suburban spaces, or we're kind of rural, but or regional, but they tend to be the smaller greys. Yes, they're very muscular, and no, you wouldn't want to go up against one, but they're not all aggressive. They do get their biggest. The biggest risk factor to kangaroos is cars. They're often hit by cars and on the side of the road. But they're lots of fun to see bounding around.
Wow. Do they really go after dogs? Because I always see them messing with dogs.
Well, look, we have two beautiful dogs here, and they're kelpies, which they say kelpies come from dingoes, but we've never had them on the property. I think because the dogs, kind of keep them out. But our dogs are so passive. With like they run around after the baby chickens, and my girl dog, she'll lay on the ground and the baby chickens will jump on her nose and on her head, and she's so gentle. She doesn't dare move.
All right. Well, on that note, in with love and out with peace.